Here we are. This is our second time to take a look at the stuff of AI. We talked about the fact that it's been very helpful for us, people who have aphasia. We have also seen that there are a lot of kinds of problems for people who have aphasia. And for this time, what we're interested in is talking about what are some problems, but to be careful about what are some places that actually work for people who have aphasia.
All right. I'm Lissa Rome. I'm a speech therapist. So I'm going to start by just introducing our first two panelists, who are Griffen Stapp and Libero Della Piana. Griffen is the executive director of Ability Central, which is a nonprofit focused on expanding communication access to the disability community. He's also been in the AI and healthcare space for over 20 years. And we've also got Libero Della Piana, who is a tech-savvy organizer and movement strategist. He's worked with many social change organizations, including Race Forward, Alliance for a Just Society, and the Drug Policy Alliance. And then we'll have some other folks joining later on. So I think Griffen is going to get us started.
Sure, Lissa, that'd be great. It's all right if I share my screen? Perfect. All right, can everybody see my screen all right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. So again, I'm Griffen Stapp. I'm the executive director at Ability Central. Again, we work towards communication access. I also sit on a handful of organization boards for AI. I've been involved with a handful of institutions from Mount Sinai to Arizona State University for developing AI. And today I wanted to share a bit on some of the problems and advancements that we have run into, particularly for AI in terms of development with aphasia as well as brain injury. Some of the current AI advancements that have become more common, particularly for current usage, is AI-assisted digital therapy, software for language and speech therapy, AI being reviewed for medical claims. That technology has been around for many, many years. They use the same sort of technology for insurance claims as well. AI virtual speech therapists. There are a large number of institutions that have started adopting that. I want to go over some of the risks as well as share a couple experiences I have from clinical studies and other experiences regarding some of the risks and concerns with AI. I categorize things in four ways. One focuses on essentially the lack of empathy and nuance overall, the limitations overall in therapy and functionality, some ethical and biased considerations, as well as the digital divide regarding the cognitive risks. Regarding the lack of empathy and nuance, with some of these new AI as well as digital therapies, we run into numerous issues regarding missing the actual personal experience. They tend to treat everybody as a machine. Everything is a one-fit-all, which creates a lot of issues. The virtual therapy and groups that currently use that in testing struggle with even understanding any person. Creating a plan to fit them in terms of speech therapy is difficult because every experience, particularly when it comes to aphasia as well as other brain injury, has so many different nuances and so many different types. Emotional stress also throws a lot of things off. Virtual therapy, as well as some of the software and integration that's being used currently, has no effect on emotional stress or any emotional change in an individual. It's not used to be measured for it. Again, it sort of treats the patient like a robot. There's one form-fit factor for all. There's also the individualized nature of aphasia. But to go back to the last point I was making is basically the personal need is missing. And a lot of these institutes that currently use it run into problems where everything is so highly individualized regarding aphasia. And so the outcomes that they're using to measure for a lot of these testing and clinical studies are having very negative outcomes. They're not actually having good conditional outcomes or improvements because, again, it sort of is creating this robotic experience of how to sort and deal with individuals with aphasia. Another topic is on limitations in therapy and functionality overall. There is a large generational gap, meaning individuals of different generations have different specific language skills, different words, different coding. A handful of the AI development that's currently being done now and tested is being singled out for specifically the younger generation. They tend to be much more applicable in terms of clinical study testing. Most colleges have an available group of individuals to be pulled in. the day-to-day experiences they have also create a different experience in terms of when they're testing on college students versus those who are older. They also tend to have a much longer gap in terms of outcomes. So their speech sometimes will include different lingo or words that will not be picked up by the AI. AI is not used to being able to filter some of that out. One of the other issues we just ran into on one of the company's boards I sit on is accents. They created basically this work program for speech therapy for two individuals with aphasia post-stroke, and they had negative outcomes. There was no positivity. They felt like the whole program created no positive impact for them. And the reason is they both had accents, and the AI that was developed for it couldn't understand that. They literally thought that they had something wrong with them. And so there's a human touch that is required as AI develops to not just focus on specific generations. It needs to be applicable and adaptable to any individual who would be using any of the AI or software integration. Because AI is new and sort of the hot keyword, it needs rigorous validation. I can tell you from hundreds of clinical studies that I scroll across and still involved with, there is not a very rigorous clientele. It's a very short window, short frame. It is much limited capacity. They will run in small groups of 10 to 15 people and assume if they have positive outcomes from the AI development, that they're good. It will work for everybody. There is also issues with efficacy and acceptance by a lot of speech language pathologists when given them the software as well as what the AI is putting out. A lot of the pathologists we've had dealt with for a couple of companies I've worked for came back and said, this just isn't correct. This isn't going to work for this individual. And the response is, we only have enough funding for 10 to 15 people and we're going to get this done. Because if we don't have an outcome, we don't keep getting money. Another thing is they often do testing on people who don't have aphasia and then try to use it as applicable for those with aphasia. I don't think many people know the small samples from clinical studies means you're not going to get the greater population. We're not going to create that much of an individualized experience. They also try to cover numerous speech issues and don't make the application specific to aphasia. I can tell you one of the companies that I just saw yesterday at a conference, their AI integration, they have a software development package for speech therapy with aphasia, and it is covering 17 different disabilities. They just got an investment of $300 million, and they are not interested in doing anything besides covering every single disability. They want an app that can cover more people because it generates more funding for them. It's also what a lot of these investment firms are asking for. There's also some ethical and bias considerations. Some of the modeling can't fit different types of language barriers. There's cultural relevance. Like I mentioned previously, there was a case where the AI basically said that the person had numerous diagnoses of disabilities because they had an accent, a Brooklyn accent, if you want a good laugh for that. There's also misrepresentation regarding different types of marginalized language and specific wording people use. They have done some specific clinical studies more focused on trying to be more diverse while missing those who actually have aphasia. What I mean by that is that some of the testing is just done on people who don't have any aphasia or brain injury, and then they adapt it saying, okay, if this is a normal person in terms of how their speech is, then this is what we assume based on our studies, or the AI says what someone with aphasia has. So again, they're taking individuals who actually should be tested out of the equation. There's also some misrepresentation regarding progressive web applications. There's too much of a focus on wider audiences, like I mentioned, for some of the funding. They also tend to overstate capabilities because a lot of this AI development is being pushed by heavy money, which means they want to cover as much as possible to continue to keep the money flowing. And that takes away from the whole patient and actual disease state focus. One last thing is on the digital divide and cognitive risks. Some early testing has shown that some individuals who struggle, particularly some of the older population, with internet use or digital platforms or accessibility, a lot of clinical studies have just thrown them out of the study, saying that they're just not going to be able to use these. AI will not be able to adapt to them because if they can't use the platform, why even bother? And these are some people who have had, one of the clinical studies they just ran, they had an entire collective of people who have had aphasia for many years. right? So they would have different experiences to add to it. It would help the software as well as AI, as well as the company understand different experiences. And they went, well, if you can't use the software application correctly, they kicked them all out of the study, just throughout the entire population. One other risk and concern that has come up in some of this work is the long-term reliance on AI, possible long-term issues that you become completely dependent on the AI itself, and you don't actually make improvements because you become reliant fully on the AI being part of your life. So yeah, that's sort of a recap. Again, clinical improvements don't always translate to the real world interactions. A lot of these companies, because there's a lot of funding, are struggling to make sure that they cover essentially enough of what needs to be covered. Sometimes the funding is pushing us away from the individual as well as the disease state. There's a handful of language biases and broad scopes. And then there's also some long-term reliance that can be unreliable. So thank you.
Should I jump right in? Well, thanks everyone for having me join this panel. Thanks to Griffen. It was very insightful overview. I'm going to step back a little bit. And first of all, I'll say that, I'm not an expert on artificial intelligence, but I have been studying this and really interested in the potential, but also the problems of AI, and was really happy to be invited by Gary to join this conversation. Why is this even a conversation is because we've seen in the past 4 or 5 years this explosion in artificial intelligence in the news, in politics, in our consciousness. It shows up when you log into Zoom. Your AI assistant is right there. When you come onto this webinar, it's everywhere. It drives me crazy. Everywhere I'm like, no, I don't want AI. I don't want AI. But it's in our lives constantly now. And we have to remember that ChatGPT, which in some ways was sort of the biggest on the scene and sort of changed the momentum of this technology, is the 5th most visited website in the world now. It's visited more than Twitter, or X as it's called now. The globally artificial intelligence data centers are using an estimate of 2% of global energy resources, which seems small, but it's massive and it's going to grow. The Financial Times estimates that 40% of the US economic growth is due to AI, these magnificent 7 AI companies, and growing. 40% of US GDP in 2025. It's 80% of growth in American stocks is AI. It is mind-boggling, huge impact. And the other thing is, something happened this summer, which I think a lot of people may not have known. The big, beautiful bill, as it was called, that the Trump administration wanted to pass, originally had a moratorium on regulation of AI. They wanted a 10-year moratorium that said that states could not regulate or restrict AI for 10 years. So basically, they're saying, like, we want this industry to grow without any government oversight or input, any democratic controls. And think about where it's come in 5 years. In 10 years into the future, the whole thing will be completely different. Now, that didn't pass. It was taken out of the final bill. But it shows you when this, the most powerful and rich companies in the world are hooked on AI, when a majority of the US economic growth in this period is hooked on AI, that this is not just something that is a choice that we pick as consumers. This is what the US capitalist system at this moment believes is the future. It's the future of the economy. It's the future of labor. It's the future of consumption, of entertainment, of culture, of care. I mean, think about if therapists are replaced by AI models, all these kinds of things. So this is coming whether we like it or not. And I think part of the challenge is what we can do to shape it, because the way it's developing, is being chosen by a very small number of really big corporations and rich people. And there are other models and paths of development, which, I think Griffen pointed to. There are other ways to develop AI than what we're seeing. So let's step back. What the heck is artificial intelligence? I mean, first of all, the term, which started in like 1955, is kind of a PR term, right? It's so broad. It can mean many different things. It encompasses many different technologies, many different strategies, and it's to the point that it almost means nothing, or could mean anything. This woman, Karen Howe, whose book Empire of AI I really recommend, he says the term artificial intelligence is like saying transportation. Like, what does it mean? Is it a bicycle? Is it a high-speed rail? Is it an airplane? Is it a, coal engine? It could mean a lot of different things. So we see here politicians saying we're going to have AI development in our community. Well, what exactly is that? And a lot of the hype and what we're seeing is the big development is these large language models, LLMs, which is Chat GPT and some of these other big AI companies are basically dependent on huge quantities of data. And so these large language models are basically dependent on massive data farms. And so we're seeing that these companies are setting up these data farms all over the world. They are largely in, impoverished communities, disempowered communities, communities of color. They're heavily dependent on water, right? They have to use clean water. They can't use salt water. They can't use wastewater to protect their machinery. And they're dependent on energy. So what we're seeing too is the reintroduction of nuclear power. 3 Mile Island was purchased by AI companies. They want to reopen that reactor. They want to reintroduce new nuclear plants for the first time in decades. And it's this insatiable kind of desire, hunger for more power, more water. And it's going to have devastation in our communities. They want to start uranium mining back up in many places in Indian country, which have been closed for a long time. All of that is a choice, like it's a developmental choice. There are other models of AI, of artificial intelligence, that are not large language models. The other problem with like the large language model, which again Griffen pointed to, is like it only knows what goes in. So if bias and cultural bias and racial bias, language bias, accent goes into the model, then it also comes out of the model. It's not really intelligent. It's basically a really good sorting system. If you think about it like this, and you ever type into the search engine and you say, JFK2, and then it automatically types the next word, like these large language models are really good at guessing the next word. But it's not doing that in a creative way, and it's not doing it in a personalized way. It's doing it based on just data, on what's popular, what's frequent. So it's like when you're thinking of that next word and struggling with it, perhaps because of aphasia, the AI may suggest the next word that is not what you're thinking of at all. But it's the word that the database, that the algorithm is saying, this is the word you should be thinking of next. And that again is a development model that's a choice that has limitations and problems. And I think, that term artificial intelligence makes it seem like the computer is smart and it's picking this word. What it's really doing is it's just churning through a lot of data. And that's why it's sucking up data as much as it can. And it also, like Griffen pointed out, it's the lowest common denominator. right? It's not trying to solve problems for particular people or for minority groups or whatever. It's trying to find the answer to the biggest, possible community. The other thing that I think is really important is that, so much of the AI sort of development and politics and money is really based on hype. It's based on projections of a potentiality, which we just don't know. Like, we don't know where the technology is going. We don't know how effective it will be at many things. It will be really good at some things, and other things it may not be as good as. And also, other foundational models besides the large language model, like visual models and audio models, they're different. They operate differently and they need a different developmental model. But everything from, the next toilet you buy to whatever, everything's going to have AI because they're trying to get investment, et cetera. On a political, economic level, I think there's an AI bubble, and we're going to see a lot of these AI companies crash and burn, and it's going to have big economic impacts. But also think about this, like if you're invested, like personally invested in using a tool, how many people have ever had a technological tool in the past decade that you loved just disappear one day? Well, this is going to happen with all these AI therapies and tools and other things because everyone's waiting to get their payday, and some of those paydays aren't going to come. And so these companies are going to disappear and all of the impact of that. All right, I'm going to wrap up by just saying that I think, to me, it's not a question of whether AI is good or bad. It's a question of, like, is there democratic and community control? Is there governmental control that helps shape the future of AI in a way that benefits people? That, I'm an artist, I come from a family of artists. Like, there's real threats to art and creativity, theft of ideas, other things, because again, these AI models they're building can't be creative. All they can do is steal and adapt things that have already been created by people. So, like, how do we protect people from that? How do we protect people's jobs? It's going to be disruptive. It's going to change everything. It's up to us to figure out what things we're going to protect. And that's true for the aphasia, the people with aphasia in this community. It's like, what are the things that can be done to make sure that these tools are helpful and not hurtful? So thanks.
In terms of both of you all getting a sense of where we're going, I think it would be useful to talk about what other people want to talk about.
We were going to bring in some community experts to maybe ask some questions and get the conversation going.
Sure, I can start. I have a bunch of them. Some of them you answered. Thank you very much. So, Griffen, I have a question first for you. In your case studies, what do you do with the research? And is it being implemented and changing any of the AI systems? So, like, for instance, one of my questions was, how does AI relate to slang and people with different languages or different accents? So I know you said that research does not include that. So is there anything you're doing to help implement that into AI?
That's a great question. I appreciate it. And thank you again for this opportunity to discuss this. So some of the research that one of the companies I do a bunch of work with, they're using the outcomes as well as speech patterns from individuals to try to include that in the AI. It's struggling mainly because, again, language is different for everybody. Everybody comes from different locales. We had a patient that came through that had an Irish accent, and the AI continued to say they had a speech dysfunction and they could not comprehend it. And I'll quote Libero and say, it really is dependent upon what goes into it as well as what comes out of it. And if the organizations that do the research don't bother to put good information going in, they'll never get the outcomes they want going out. And I can just tell you that this big study that's multi-state across the US at 15 different hospitals right now with thousands of patients they're testing this on is going into a very expensive application that's going to be on the market very soon. And on a positive note, because they run these studies, it's super helpful because it allows them to bring in different language barriers and make these applications better, particularly for people with aphasia and other brain injuries. But it also has a downside because they throw out a lot of data that does not fit the outcome they want. I can test a handful of studies I've seen where they had bad outcomes, particularly for certain people with aphasia, and they went, well, that's not going to fit for everybody, so don't worry about it, and scrape the data.
Okay, and my second follow-up question to that is I know that you said there's a lot of private funding, and I know some companies rely on federal funding. So if any of that stops, how will that harm AI?
I will again quote Libero, who is way ahead of us on this, and that there is billions and billions of dollars being pumped into AI, and eventually there's going to be a reality check, or as he said, crash, where they're going to find that some of these applications are not really AI. We are telling you they're AI, but they're not. There are already some applications on, like even the Google Store, for certain speech therapy that is being used that is not AI. It's advertised as AI. Instead, it's here's your plan. If you click this age group, here's a different plan. That's not AI, right? That's just literally incomes and outcomes from it. But they're advertising it because they want the money. And so eventually there's going to be this come to reality moment where we're going to find that some of these companies have burned probably billions of dollars to create AI that never went anywhere because they didn't think they'd actually have to produce a product. Now there's good stuff, which hopefully means that because there's so much private funding, they'll continue to put behind it. But when this crash, I don't know when, but I assume there will be a terrible, crash eventually for this, much like a bubble, that a lot of the private funding will dry up. And then we have to hope that the government or states start pumping some money, particularly in healthcare, which makes sense for them to be involved in that aspect to make up the difference. I do know there's a handful of bills, even at California State, Missouri State, and a few other states that are looking to put money into AI development. The problem is without regulations for it, how they fund it right now is kind of up in the air.
Let's make sure Craig and Alfredo get a chance to hit on this.
Yeah. Do people with aphasia use Chat GPT? I have used it like maybe 3 times and that's it. What's happening?
I thought what's interesting is the question is that Greg's raising an interesting issue because the question is who's using it and who can use it. Some people have difficulty writing, period. I know in my disability with the stuff, my thing that got lost when I had the stroke was names and dates, right? Here I can remember all type of shit of the work I did and everything else, but if you ask me when the hell did it happen, I can't tell you the year that it happened because it's not there in my brain. I try to think about the names of everyone. I can see pictures in my head of all the people, but I won't remember their names. I had to realize that I had to ask the same question 7 different ways so I could finally get to closer to the truth of what I knew was the truth and of other documents that could back it up. Because it will look for the simplest, most common thing that's being said out there on the subject matter, and that doesn't mean that the shit will be true. That's one of the realities that dawned on me with AI. It's repeating that we're out there that's popular doesn't have to be correct at all.
Well, and Alfredo, just to add to that, quoting a false source, it could also be that it's made it up. I mean, we're also they call them artificial intelligence hallucinations, where because it's just swimming in all this data, it gets confused, or it's like, oh, the UFW convention, it's the United Firefighter Workers or whatever, and it mixes it up. Or I don't know if you saw, there was an AI recipe for cookies and it said, put a cup of sand in your cookies. And people were like, what? So, these are problematic things when you're dealing with the large language models. They're not actually thinking, they're just kind of sorting data.
One thing I wanted to add was that people with aphasia or strokes, they have a wide range of difficulty. And many people can't say more than a couple of words. I mean, do caregivers do all the AI support, and stuff?
I'd love to hear more from Griffin on some of the interesting developments. I'll say one thing. Again, like thinking about different paths of development, like the large language model, the benefit of huge amounts of data and the ability to pick the next word, right? But it's in a box. It can only know what you put in. It can't create something new. What's interesting to me is if you had a very different kind of machine learning product. So, for instance, if a digital tool, if a program learned that every time you said a certain word, you meant this other word as an individual, and you could teach it to help so it could remind you, oh, I actually meant Tony, not Tina, but I say Tina. That's interesting. Like some of these models, they don't, and that doesn't depend on having these massive databases and all this. It just depends on a different kind of model of artificial intelligence.
I can share a couple of things. A quick funny story. One of the organizations I did some work for, and they had to scrap their AI model. So they ran a test with essentially speech therapy on some aphasia patients, and it was supposed to create, protocols for them, right? In terms of like training models. It created training models for them to write when the 4 individual patients couldn't write. And they went back and fixed it, and it then again created a writing model for them. And so they threw that in the trash. But there is good amongst all the risks and concerns. There is quite a bit of effort for improvement, similar to what Libero was saying. There's enhanced training models where it's creating what we call synthetic aphasic speech, where it's applying linguistic patterns to normal speech, right, for each type of individual in order for it to train to better understand, fragmented sentences. There's a current product, one of the companies I work for, where it's combining auditory data, like visual cues, with facial expressions and gestures in order to improve the AI's ability to basically accurately interpret aphasic language. It doesn't necessarily fit form for everybody, but it's learning, right? That's the hope of this type of technology. They're also using brain decoders where it's translating. There's a couple patients and stuff up in California State, up in San Francisco, where they have chips where it's translating thoughts directly into text, which they're also trying to use on those with aphasia in order to bypass, many of the issues we've discussed today, like with vocalization. There also, to go back to the chat GPT aspect, there is AI assisted chat GPT integration that working on for like written communication and therapy exercises and how it can complement the work of a human therapist. So to cover both boundaries. So instead of people having, 17 different appointments at once, they can instead get, okay, that's going to take 6 to 12 months. They can create a whole therapy exercise based on what you're going through currently and to try to make it adaptable. It's still quite a ways off, but there is a lot of positive that's going with this for institutions that I want to say care, right, and are actually treating it as an individualized, developed AI, because I believe that's the best way, particularly for not only, post-stroke and aphasia and brain injury, that's the best way for these models to develop.
Well, I am a member of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and they are trying to do a study that is a tool that uses AI for SLP and for strokes or aphasia. I think going to be very, very good.
Both of you have told us that money is an important thing. That has been a tremendous problem for people who have aphasia and are trying to actually get money for anything because it's been cut off. If we look at sort of 90% of people don't have the time for people to actually get additional stuff for being able to do things because of their money, that is being hooked up with people's ability to deal around AI and money. We can't just talk about how this is going to be good until we understand about the question about money.
Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say that the financial pressures are going to be huge. And I mean, you look at ChatGPT was started as a nonprofit and it become a for-profit because there's just so much money. Many of these technologies are also really expensive to develop. I mean, they're just really expensive. So that will also put pressure on the development path. But, you know, for instance, if there was some sort of public good space for AI or some nonprofit carve out where government says we're going to, you know, develop AI, you know, with therapeutic goals, with, you know, public health goals, whatever, that would be a very different kind of environment. Right now, the pressure from these companies is let us do whatever we want and make as much money as we can while we figure this stuff out.
So you start saying, so where is this all going? And the other one clearly is ChatGPT is free right now, but it won't be free forever. And if we're going to have to pay for it, a lot of people who don't have the income won't be able to use it. Right? It's going to become outrageously expensive then to try to turn on and use that stuff. Become limited to those who can afford. That's like healthcare for special stuff for rich people is always there, but not for poor people.
We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Someone asked, what are the top 3 things people should do when AI is presented to you by health professionals as an option for your situation? Is there a place to report it? Can we report reviews or complaints to any medical regulatory body?
Regarding the medical body, so I guess the question really is who regulates healthcare AI, since there isn't really a regulatory board for it. If it's a product that's integrated with AI, the FDA would be. If it's just AI in general, like if you ever present it to it, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is technically them, and the FDA are the governors for it. But there isn't really a healthcare scenario right now where legally they're supposed to be using AI. If it happens behind the scenes, they can't get in trouble.
Another question, this one, Griffen, was for you. How do AI programmers balance large language models with very small individual language models, meaning individual users, say with aphasia, where those small individual language models may or may not reflect the large language averages?
The answer, and I'm sure others on this call can answer as well, is that they don't. They'll take small subsets and extrapolate them. They'll literally only spend, so this goes back to the money thing. They'll pump a ton of money in, but the outcome is they need a successful product. It doesn't require them because there's no regulations that say AI has to be screened through, 10 million patients for it to be an application that will be used. There just isn't a barometer for that. And so right now, a lot of these studies only focus on a small group of individuals, and then they just assume that it fits for everybody. Form fit factor is the phrase they use right now in AI, particularly even in aphasia studies.
And I would only add that there was a time before 2020 when there was a lot of different developmental paths, like small language models and the different kinds of approaches that weren't based on these giant data centers and massive suctioning of language. But I think ChatGPT and the success of that has kind of made that the path. And we'll see. I mean, I hope that there's other models that emerge that are more sustainable environmentally and also more sort of flexible. But yeah, it's really, I don't know if people saw that there was this Chinese experiment where they basically had AI operating on a personal computer instead of this giant, server structure with, and everyone was kind of like, what? And it's because it wasn't a large language model, it was a different approach. And I think hopefully we'll see some other approaches like that may also benefit, like getting around questions of bias and other things.
Is there any privacy in AI, like personal health information of that sort? Like if we're doing these studies and like what is that information? How is it stored and shared?
Most clinical studies are regulated essentially under whether it's FDA or the EU has the AI Act, the GDPR for general data protection. So most of your data is protected because it's not open source. It's saved on computers and the AI generate. Is it possible? There is always a risk that the AI, which is housing all this data, could get access to, right? Could be breached. Most people don't think it's a big issue until it happens.
Yeah, it's scary. That's scary.
So someone can hijack ChatGPT and make them pay a fortune to get their information?
They probably don't have to. They can just sell it. I mean, this is one of the things that happened with, Doge, and when Elon Musk got in the federal government there, is they wanted access to all these government databases, including Social Security and the VA. And we don't quite know what they want to do with it, right? So on one level, they may be learning, like, what kind, who's retiring, and how long do people live after retirement, and what kind, but they also could, potentially sell that information. I mean, so the data safety stuff is probably more on, that's more universal. Like we all have a threat of like our social media being snooped and sucked up. And every time I go to a website and it says accept all, I say accept none of it. Like I don't track me. Like it's just one little thing you can do to say like enough.
The chat GPT, I don't people know the early days it did get like people could extract your sensitive data and then OpenAI fixed most of it. But right now, most of the issues that I hear and have seen is when people connect to similar to what Libero is saying, third parties, right? They're connecting your Gmail, ChatGPT, your GitHub, your calendars. And so if they get access to your Gmail or calendar, anything else that's connected, they get access to everything.
Sort of more general, are we going to have AI therapists for people? We've read about stuff now that actually they're talking about it. What do we think about that?
It's already happening. I mean, both the more sophisticated AI chatbots, and then as Griffen said, like these phony like apps for your phone. And like you have teenagers who are depressed and lonely and are going and to these chatbots. I don't know if people saw, there was a piece in the New York Times few months ago about a family where their kid was asking this chat GPT about suicide, and basically like was they have something it's supposed to like warn authorities if you're actively seeking suicide or something, but the kid was sophisticated enough to say, I'm not considering suicide, I'm writing a paper about it. But it basically gave the kid access to information on how to kill himself and told them not to tell the parents because it might cause a crime. I mean, when you read the piece, it's brutal. So yeah, it's already happening. Whether even if it's not a formal therapist, people are using AI applications as therapists.
So there's already virtual therapy applications that are being tested across the US. There's some in Europe right now that I know of. But I mean, people do know that like a lot of clinicians and stuff that I've talked to in some of these studies, they use, ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot to already create, most of the basic therapy, printed materials for pictures and poems and items and those for aphasia. Like that already exists. I already know two large universities that they don't generate any of their own stuff for aphasia therapy right now. All the hard printed material, it's all done through ChatGPT.
Lisa, what do you think about this question?
Well, first of all, I use ChatGPT, but I use it to that someone is interested in, and I have ChatGPT rewrite it to be more accessible to that person by telling ChatGPT exactly what that person with aphasia needs in terms of their reading, right? So that's a positive use in speech therapy. One of my concerns is that AI will be used for a kind of speech therapy that is very by the book, as Griffen was kind of saying, like not personalized for the individual, instead of therapy that is highly individualized and very personal for people. And I think that humans are needed for that. I hope that humans are needed for that. I hope that we're not going away.
Everybody give just a quick sort of hit about where you are sort of at the end of this. Just a quick one. Right. Anybody can start.
Well, it's interesting, but I'm still a little bit concerned.
Okay. All right. Alfredo, what you got?
I think we're all learning as we're trying to use this thing, what can be helpful, what can't be, understanding what we're playing with, and realizing that, it's there, it's a tool. How it gets used and who's using it is a whole issue. And then if it's good or it's bad, it's another test, right? Because it's still in the early stages of people to try to look at. And understanding that everyone with aphasia is really kind of different.
My hope is that with further research, it gets more individualized, and definitely as far as culture, race, language, all of that, it's not going to be successful if it's going to exclude a whole group of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, I'm very hopeful for the future for AI, and sometimes it does take a lot of money to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall to make the improvements that could be possibly very successful and helpful for those with brain injuries and aphasia. But at the same time, the risks only will continue to grow with how they use it and how it will be on outcomes.
I'm cautiously hopeful as well. I think it's coming whether we like it or not. And so it's up to all of us to help shape it so that there's many paths and that people are protected as we go forward.
Melissa.
I think I gave my summary. I like humans. I think it can also be a helpful tool. So we have one more session in this planned series of 3. We're going to be talking about making plans to live with AI, and it will be in 2 weeks on Wednesday, the 27th of October at 4 o'clock Pacific time. We hope to see people there. Back to you, Gary.
Good job, everybody.
Thank you.
Let's see the next time we can talk about how we actually can learn about some stuff that'll be helpful for us, for people who have aphasia, and in terms of being able to use AI. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you all.